Hey everyone, and welcome to our small footprint. My name is Nyssa, and if you're new here, we are a family of 8 who live off-grid in Australia. Today's video is another one in the current series of daily videos showing what we do to make a 6 to 8 week grocery haul for the 8 of us last throughout that time. So we buy in bulk in the beginning of the month, or the beginning of the 6 to 8 weeks, however long it's going to be, and then in that next 10 to 14 days is sort of what it works out to be. I have to do a lot of prep and freezer meals and canning and all that sort of thing to make sure that the food that we buy is going to last us for that 8 weeks. So I do a lot of different things to do that, and everyone's always interested in how we manage it. So this is I'm going to say day 4, but don't quote me on that. I'll have to check when I do the editing of the food prep. And we have a bit of a process of what you have to get through first, and depends on what we bought from the fruit and veg. And there's a lot of different variables as to what needs to be done. Yesterday was a whole lot of baking, and today is some and today is using one of the pork roasts because it was gives us something to eat, but also to start processing through some of that meat as well. So I did some canning and some smoking and all sorts of things. So I will bring you along to see what we got done today. Alright, so we started with one of the pork roasts. So I bought 2 of these pork roasts. I don't need to make sausages this month, so I'm not going to be mincing one up for sausages, though I may mince one up for another purpose, but it won't be for sausages. But I pulled this one out today to get worked on anyway, because we need to get through them at some point, and this was just the next thing on the cards. So what we do with our pork roast, this is a really cheap roast to buy, which is why we do it. It's only $7.99 a kilo. And they're around about 7 kilo packs. So I normally get about $55 is around about what I pay for each of them. And they're a rolled roast. I use them in a myriad of ways, but today what we're going to do is we're going to use some of it as a roast for eating now and can up some of it for eating later. But the first thing I do whenever I buy them is I cut all the rind off and I cook it over potatoes. So I buy these little baby red potatoes at Costco. I really like these little baby red potatoes. They have gone up in price a little bit, but I only buy a couple of bags, and basically for this purpose. So I buy those and I stick them in my cast iron trays, and then I cut all the rind off the roast, and then I slice that rind into smaller pieces, and I place that over the top of the potatoes. I spray the rind with a bit of oil and sprinkle it with a bit of salt, and then we bake it. It's really nice done in the wood stove, but I don't have any wood cut at the moment, and Darryl was doing something else, so I didn't get him to do it. So I just did it in the barbecue. But it's high temp. You want to use high temp because you want that crackle to crackle up, and you want the potatoes to roast, and you want the fat that's under the crackle to render into the potatoes. And that way your potatoes are cooking in that fat, but you can also use that fat later. So it's what we'd classify as dirty fat, as in that it's had meat and stuff cooked. It's had stuff cooked in it. It's got little bits of stuff, like when you save bacon fat, and it's really tasty to fry veggies and stuff in. So that dirty fat we keep and use for that sort of thing. So we do it every time we buy these roasts. This is how we do it, because we don't have any real use for the rind otherwise. We don't tend to roast it with the rind on or anything like that, and it's a good way. Like the potatoes are really nice done this way, and we get that fat from it as well. So we find it a really good process to use. We regularly do it during the day while we're doing other things, and then those potatoes become lunch and snacks throughout the day with whatever else we've got going on, whether we fry up some eggs or there's some sort of meat leftovers, or we have zucchini slice leftovers at the moment, things like that, and we just eat the potatoes for lunch and throughout the day while we're doing everything else. As part of the day's meal sort of things. Sometimes there's enough left for dinner as well, but not always. So I put about 1/3 of the roast aside to use as a smoked roast. I tend to put a dry rub on my roasts that I smoke, so it's sort of a mixture of brown sugar, or I didn't have any brown sugar made up, so I just added a bit of molasses and raw sugar, smoked paprika, some onion powder, some garlic powder, salt and pepper, mustard powder, I don't think I said that, a bunch of my standard sort of spices that I always use for rubs and things like that, and we make it slightly sweet. I like the sugars in it, especially when you're smoking something, because it releases moisture, so it helps keep the meat moist, but it also gives you that nice crust on it. I like to coat my roast in mustard, so I'm using the whole grain mustard that I made myself. It's just one that I made. There's a few videos back where I made a few different types of mustard. This is just the whole grain mustard. I coat the roast in the mustard. So the mustard is what's going to hold the rub onto the pork, but it's also going to help with moisture as well, and keeping the pork moist as well. So I coat the whole piece of roast in the mustard. Dijon is nice here too. Any mustard is fine. This just happened to be the jar that I found in the fridge. I have 3 different types of mustard in the fridge. This was the one that I found. This is the one that I'm using. So I coated it with the mustard, and then I coat it with the dry rub. So then you just want to sprinkle the dry rub all over it and pat it and rotate it around on the board so that it's well covered in that dry rub as well as the mustard. And then I have a Bluetooth thermometer thing, not a really fancy meter one. I'd really like one of the fancy meter ones that you stick in there and it has no cords, but I don't have one yet. So at the moment I'm using one that has a cord to a little unit, and the little unit will connect to my phone through Bluetooth so I can check the temperature wherever I am. The probe goes in the pork and the pork goes in the smoker, and we cook it until the internal temperature is 72, 73 degrees. The smoker runs at around about, it varies. Pork can be cooked at a bit higher temperature than because this is a slicing roast, not a pulling roast, so you can run it at sort of 180, I suppose, if you want to. I forgot it was in there, to be honest, and it was running at about 100, 110, and that's fine. It was just slow smoking, so that's cool. So we put the piece of pork in the smoker to be smoked, and then I just put the probe in it and I walked away. It'll send me alerts on my phone if it was too low or too high or anything like that, so I just ignored that. This is what the crackle cooked over the potatoes looks like when it's done. This is one tray because the kids had already finished another tray, and I forgot to get photos of it. So this is the other tray that was done. I was tossing up what I wanted to do with the rest of that pork roast, whether I wanted to hold it for something else, whether I wanted to mince it up, whether I wanted to freeze it. I wasn't sure. So what I decided to do, though, is I made a pork stew in a jar. Now, we're having issues with our carrots going black because of oxidization, because of the weather changes and the moisture, and some of our potatoes, the potatoes that we bought were really cheap because there was a couple of rotten ones in there because they had been rain damaged prior to being bagged up. So we needed to use some of the potatoes as well. So I sat there and went, well, to use those up, this is what we'll do. So I did a bit of a Google because I've never really made a pork stew or a pork soup or anything other than my minced pork soups. So I did a bit of Google, and most pork stews have a tomato base in them, which worked out really well because we had those couple of jars of the roasted tomato soup base that hadn't sealed and I'd stuck in the fridge and I hadn't used yet. So what I did was I made up a sort of on the fly and make your own soup sort of a thing in a jar using the pork. So I grabbed out some of my 36s, which are Vicola's jars, and they're 1200 ml size, and I layered them in like I do with my beef stews, my chicken soups and all that sort of thing. All I did was I had diced up some celery, some garlic, some onion into nice small dices, and I put a couple of tablespoons in the bottom of every jar. I then put in a couple of handfuls of pork. These are light on the meat, but that's sort of how sometimes we extend the meat here too, because we very rarely, like, one jar isn't enough to eat, and we rarely open 2 jars of the same soup. What we tend to do is do like a jar of soup with meat in it and a jar of soup that just has veggies in it, and that works quite well for us. And then we either put pasta with it or bread with it or whatever. So these soups are meant as family meals, not as single serves, obviously because of the size of the jars, and that works quite well for us. So I did a couple of handfuls of the pork in there, and then did cubed potatoes and carrots and filled the jar. Basically topped the jar up to the top with diced potato and carrot. I didn't have any stock made up, and I do have bones there to make stock, but by the time I decided what I was doing, it was a bit late. So what I did was I used my Thermomix chicken stock paste. So that is a stock paste that's made with the Thermomix using real chicken, real vegetables, real spices, real herbs, and then it's made into a puree with salt, and it's stored in the freezer. So I just used a spoonful of that in the top of each jar, and then poured some of the roasted tomato in the top of each jar as well, and then just topped them up with boiling water. So that boiling water is going to dissolve the stock through it and push all the tomato through it as well. You want to make sure that you debubble these jars really well, especially if you've got a decent amount of vegetables in there, because there's going to be some air bubbles, and that pork tends to stick to the sides and doesn't let the liquid go to the bottom. So make sure you debubble it and check your levels afterwards, because your water level will drop if there is air pockets in the bottom that you adjust as you're debubbling. So I debubbled it well, and then put the and then topped up any liquid that needed to be topped up. The process for canning is the same as any pressure canning, and these are Fowlers jars, so they have the rubber rings. So I clean the outside of the ring with white vinegar, put the rubber ring around it, and then I wipe that down with vinegar as well in case I've had something on my hands. I wipe the insides of the stainless steel lids with vinegar as well, put them on top, and then put the clips on. Because they're a 1200ml jar, they are canned for the same time as a quart plus 20%. So it ends up being 108 minutes that these need to be canned, 90 minutes for a quart with meat in it, 108 for an added 20% on top. It's a long time canning. You need to make sure you put enough water in your canner to compensate for that, because it's a long time canning. So they say, 3 quarts in the bottom of your canner is all you need for pressure canning, but that's sort of based on a 90-minute canning time. So be generous with your water, but you need to make sure that the water is not up near the rims of your jars too. And with 36s, that's nice and easy because they're a really tall jar. So generous with your water, because it's going to be a long processing time. Standard process, jars go in, lid goes on, you let the canner vent for 10 minutes. Once it's vented for 10 minutes, you put your weight on. Once your weight starts jiggling, you process it for the 108 minutes. At the end of the 108 minutes, you turn the heat off, and then you wait until all the pressure has dropped to nil, take your weight off, crack your lid, wait for 5 minutes, take your lid off, pull your jars out. Very standard pressure canning, and there's a lot of recipes out there that do the, make your own soups are a common thing. They do. Most of the recipes say that you only want to fill the jars 2/3 full. I buck that a little bit because I don't really understand. Because if I was canning plain potatoes, I could fill the jar. If I was canning plain meat, I could fill the jar. If I was canning plain carrots, I could fill the jar. So I don't really understand why I can't fill the jar when it just happens to be a mix of diced stuff. So I fill the jar, but that is personal choice. Because I'm pretty sure the guidelines state it's 2/3 full of solids and then the rest of liquid. So take that as you wish. When the pork hit 73 degrees, we pulled it out and I wrapped it in foil to rest. So because it's been smoked, you're going to want to wrap it in foil to allow those juices to, I can't remember the word. If you cut it, you can let all the juices out. If you wrap it in foil, it's going to hold all the juices in. There is a word for it. I can't remember it off the top of my head for some reason. But so you want to wrap it in foil and rest it for a while, at least half an hour, but longer if you happen to have the time. And then after it had rested, I sliced it up so that we could have it for dinner. Now, after everything that had done for the day, it's sort of proving my statement yesterday correct too. We had leftover flatbread dough in the fridge from yesterday, so I decided that we just pull that out and we would have this smoked pork, and we had leftover shredded coleslaw as well. So I just made a new batch of mayo and mayofied that cabbage to turn it into coleslaw, and we had the smoked pork slices on flatbreads for dinner. So proving that whole point correct, that the flatbread is just such a simple thing to do for a dinner meal on a summer day when you've been busy during the day. It's filling and it's tasty, but it's just really quick and easy to get done. So that worked out well that we had that other half of that dough left, as well as that other half of the cabbage shredded in the fridge as well. The kids had eaten the potatoes off and on all day, of course, as well. So that was today. Still pretty chock-packed, but not quite as chock-packed, because this video I think is a bit shorter than the last couple of days. So we got plenty done, but I think I had a whole lot of typing done in the morning too. So anyway, that was today's stuff that we got done, and we're on to, what am I doing, planning tomorrow? Pineapples. Have to get pineapples done. They definitely need to get done. I think a few of them have got some bruises and stuff because they've been sitting too long, so they need to get done. And then, I don't know, I'm not sure what comes next. So I will see you on the next video anyway, and thank you very much for watching, and I will talk to you next time. Bye guys.